I'm the chair of the Diamond Development Initiative, and let me say a couple of words. If you don't know about it, I hope you soon will. The Diamond Development Initiative is an NGO. It's about 3 or 4 years old now. It's registered in the United States. It's a charitable organization. And the idea is to work with those artisanal diamond diggers that you saw in the film there. There are 1.3 million artisanal diamond diggers in Africa. They earn, on average, about $1 a day. Not just less than 3, but on average about $1 a day. They work under very difficult circumstances. Health conditions are bad. The prices they get are terrible. The health conditions, everything is poor. This is where conflict diamonds began. It began in the alluvial diamond fields of Africa, where diamonds can be dug without bulldozers and without digging straight down into the earth. The idea of DDI is to complement the Kimberley process. Kimberley process is about regulation, DDI is about development. And the idea is to bring industry and civil society and interested governments together to work on this. And from the industry side on our board, I chair the board, but people you know, Matt Runcie, Stefan Fischler, Andy Bone are on the board, and we have an advisory committee. Martin is on it, Ben Kinsler, Jeff Fisher, Eli Isaacoff, and a lot of others that you would know. So the idea is to try and deal with some of these issues in a holistic way to bring about development where there actually isn't much. So to human rights. Less than a month ago, the chair of the Kimberley process told an Agence France Presse reporter in Angola that the Kimberley process is not a human rights organization. That's what we have the United Nations for, he said. Is this true? I don't think so. The issue of human rights in the diamond industry isn't new, and it can't be divorced from the Kimberley process and the effort to halt conflict diamonds. It's worth reviewing briefly the history of conflict diamonds because from the very beginning, the Kimberley process was all about human rights. Let me go through some not so distant history. The war in Angola, much of it fueled by diamonds, 500,000 dead. The war in DRC, heavily fueled by diamonds, 3.3 million dead, if not more, from direct and indirect causes. Liberia, Charles Taylor took control of his own country's meager diamond resources and then fostered a proxy war in Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone, a war characterized by banditry and horrific brutality waged mainly against civilians and fueled almost entirely by diamonds. 75,000 people or more lost their lives. Rebel butchery left thousands of women, men, and children without hands and feet, disfigured physically and psychologically for life. And I think it was when Martin Rappaport went to Sierra Leone in 2000 and saw that and came back and wrote his article, Guilt Trip, and coined the phrase conflict diamonds. I think this is when the industry suddenly started to, what was on your chart this morning, the shock, denial, engagement, something like that.
Change curve.
No human rights issues in any of this. The second paragraph in the Kimberley process preamble speaks, and I quote, of the devastating impact of conflicts fueled by the trade in conflict diamonds on the peace, safety, and security of people in affected countries, and the systematic and gross human rights violations that have been perpetrated in such conflicts, unquote. I start with this because it's important to remember why the Kimberley process was created. It was created first and foremost to end the phenomenon of conflict diamonds and to prevent it from returning. Ending conflict diamonds meant ending the conflicts they fueled and the human rights horrors that were the subtext of those conflicts. Clearly, I think it was flawlessly clear, that it was all about human rights. That didn't need to be spelled out beyond the Kimberley process preamble because nobody imagined at the time that some governments, in pursuit of their internal controls, the internal controls required by the Kimberley process, would shoot their own citizens to death and would beat, rape, and rob others. The Kimberley process also aimed to protect the legitimate interests of the diamond industry and the millions of people who depend on it for a livelihood, most of them in very poor countries. And it offered a hope, the hope that diamonds might, in these war-torn countries, be transformed from a negative to a positive, into something that might provide revenue and jobs and hope. The Kimberley process has accomplished a lot. The very fact of the Kimberley process negotiations helped choke diamond supplies to rebel movements in Angola and Sierra Leone, and this contributed to the end of hostilities. The Kimberley process has the best diamond database in the world. And the KPCS is credited by several countries with growth in legitimate diamond exports and thus of tax revenue. The Kimberley process is discussed as a model for other extractive industries and as a model of participation and communication between governments, industry, and civil society, all of which play an active and meaningful role in its management. But there was no provision in the Kimberley process to do what all regulators must do. There was no provision to plug holes, tighten loose bolts, and fix the parts that were not working. A fundamental part of law enforcement is the need to keep one step ahead of the crooks as they figure out new ways around rules and regulations. But in the Kimberley process, there's been from the beginning a prohibition against what is euphemistically called opening the document. In practical terms, this means that while some things can be changed, anything that one or two participants don't like can be blocked by a single veto and a chorus against reopening the document. This is a bit like saying there can never be any additions to the Magna Carta. We'll live in the 13th century forever. Despite these handicaps, for a while, there was quite a lot of optimism. Today, almost 7 years on, in my view, the Kimberley process is failing badly, and it wouldn't rate a 4 out of 10 from any serious independent observer. Accountability is the primary issue. There's no Kimberley process central authority. Problems are shifted from one internal working group to another. Debates on vital issues drag on for years. There's no voting in the Kimberley process. All discussions are reached by consensus, which in the real world means general agreement, but in the Kimberley process it means unanimity. Individual countries can and frequently do hold up forward movement on anything and everything. Nobody takes responsibility for action or inaction, failure or success. Nobody is held responsible. The Kimberley process peer review mechanism, which I helped to design, is a disaster. Some reviews are thorough and recommendations are heeded. In many cases, however, recommendations are ignored and there's little or no follow-up. Some reviews are completely bogus. In 2008, a bloated 9-member team visited Guinea, a country whose diamond industry is beset by corruption, weak diamond controls, rotten statistics, and almost certain smuggling. Over the past 2 years, official Guinean diamond exports have increased by a staggering 600%. 600%. The Kimberley team spent less than 2 hours outside of the capital city, and its report remained unfinished for almost 11 months. This is a parody of effective monitoring, and sadly, it's not an exception. Angola has obvious human rights problems. Hundreds of thousands of illicit Congolese diamond diggers have been expelled over the last 3 or 4 years to the accompaniment of serious human rights abuse. Miners are beaten, robbed, raped, and force-marched hundreds of miles. The Kimberley process has had nothing to say about this because, as the Kimberley process chair says, it's not a human rights organization. Zimbabwe, rife with smuggling and gross diamond-related human rights abuse, has consumed months of ineffectual internal Kimberley process debate through 2009. I'll dwell on this one for a moment because it's indicative of so much. Late in 2000, as Georgette has told us, as many as 200, perhaps more, illicit diamond miners were killed by the Zimbabwe armed forces. Many more were beaten, robbed, and wounded. This was widely reported in the media and by Zimbabwe human rights organizations. Partnership Africa-Canada reported on it in March this year, and Human Rights Watch issued its powerful report in June. The Kimberley process was finally shamed into sending a review mission. The team was huge, but despite its size, or perhaps because of it, it did find evidence of serious non-compliance with minimum KP standards, as well as dramatic human rights abuse. The testimony of some victims was so poignant that the Liberian team leader left one of the meetings in tears. The team's interim report recommended, among other things, suspension of Zimbabwe from the Kimberley process. But the suspension recommendations was quickly denounced by the Kimberley process chair, who apparently told reporters in Harare, we listened to the tape, before the team's report had even been completed, that suspension would not happen. Under pressure, he since denied that he ever made the statement. It's obvious, however, that regional politics are at work and that the vetoes are being lined up. Australian diplomats have paid quiet visits to the governments of some team members, recommending against any action that might damage the interests of a diamond mining company with Australian connections in Zimbabwe. For these governments and the others that are currently active behind the scenes, business and politics trump human rights and the very purpose of the Kimberley process. They trump good management, they trump common sense and decency, and they trump the long-term interests of the entire diamond industry. Other cases of flagrant non-compliance have been ignored until they become media scandals. Fraud and corruption in Brazil, Ivorian conflict diamonds smuggled through neighboring countries. In two of Africa's largest diamond producers, Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo, internal controls are so weak that nobody can be certain where half the diamonds really come from. Venezuela has a record of shooting artisanal diamond miners, but this has never been discussed in the Kimberley process. In fact, elaborate measures were taken in 2008 to allow Venezuela to remain a Kimberley process participant, despite its flagrant non-compliance, on the understanding that it would suspend exports and imports until it had regained control of its diamond industry. A study by Partnership Africa-Canada in Venezuela in May this year, corroborated by a BBC team that visited Venezuela 3 weeks ago, found that Venezuelan diamonds are still being openly mined and openly smuggled. The Kimberley process continues, however, to accept the official Venezuelan position. As a result, for more than 4 years, the Kimberley process has implicitly sanctioned Venezuelan diamond smuggling. This is the organization that is supposed to stop smuggling. The cost of a Kimberley process collapse would be disastrous for an industry that benefits so many countries and for the millions of people in poor countries who depend directly and indirectly on it. A criminalized diamond economy would undoubtedly reemerge and conflict diamonds could soon follow. The budget of the UN peacekeeping mission in Liberia this year is $561 million. That's $200 million more than the budget of the entire Liberian government. The UN peacekeeping operations in Côte d'Ivoire and the Congo have a combined budget of $1.8 billion between July this year and June next year. The United Nations is spending billions on peacekeeping, but after 7 years, the Kimberley process cannot get even close to proper diamond tracking in Angola and the Congo. The Kimberley process is too important to fail, but it's too important to too many countries, companies, and people for make-believe. Its problems are not insurmountable. They can be fixed. They can even be fixed without a major overhaul, but it will require a degree of honesty, commitment, and energy that has so far been absent. The solutions are straightforward. The Kimberley process requires explicit reference to human rights in the management of diamond resources. It requires an independent, proactive, and efficient body of expertise that can analyze problems and act quickly to correct them, applying meaningful sanctions where necessary. It needs an independent review mechanism. It needs a conflict of interest policy that will recuse parties with commercial or political interests. It needs a good dose of transparency. And it needs a voting system instead of a vetoing system. Too much to ask? Some countries, some governments may think so. The industry may think the ideal is not worth fighting very hard for. But remember where we came from. Remember the death, destruction, and warfare that was fueled by diamonds. Remember how this industry, whose product is held by so many as a symbol of love, fidelity, and beauty, was infected by smuggling, tax evasion, theft, and sanctions busting. And remember that we already have a global agreement that involves 78 governments, an agreement with a box full of tools that, with some fine-tuning, are more than capable of dealing with the issues. Things can change if governments and the industry really want to turn the Kimberley process from the talk shop it's become into the shining example of responsible management that we thought it would be when we first began to talk about it 10 years ago. Thanks.